Hey everybody, this is Kohdok here, and I'm recording this video on Halloween, and I've got something interesting for you guys today. This is a game called Berserk War of the Realms, and it's based on a Russian card game, also named Berserk, that it's a game in the vein of, it came out in the mid-2010s in the vein of games like Summoner Wars and Mage Wars and Wars. It's, I criticized these kinds of games in my video more recently, one of my 7 Deadly Sins videos, about how it's a game where the cards are used as pawns that move around a board. And there actually was a brief stint of these games. Like I said before, Summoner Wars was probably the most prominent example of that. Berserk is a game that's similar to that. In fact, this is an addition from a 2014 Kickstarter project, 2013, 2014, I can't remember which it was. But another one sort of at the tail end of a lot of those games, but it's actually been around since 2003, and in Russia, it actually is a just straight-up trading card game. In this case, they were trying to market it as an expandable card game. A lot of people have maybe heard the Fantasy Flight trademark of living card game, where they sell you like entire sets of cards that you can use to play the game with, rather than forcing you to fish through booster packs. Depending on the game that you make, that can work. For games like Dominion, where one copy of the game will support like so many players and only one person has to have a copy of the game to enjoy, then yeah, an expandable card game works for me. Living card games feel like, you know, if you wanted to play a game of Dominion, every person who wanted to play Dominion would have to have a copy of the game in order to play Dominion, and I'm not as big a fan of that. It's living card games and stuff like this are a bit like the expandable card games I'm more used to, like Dominion or Cards Against Humanity or Sentinels of the Multiverse, but actually more predatory than that. So maybe I should do something about my stance on LCGs, but anyway, that's not really why I'm talking about Berserk today. I did have it pointed out to me. It is another game from another region. For example, I talked about the Chilean game Myths and Legends in another video. That's from South America. This one's from Russia. It's kind of proof that my talk about the 7 Deadly Sins doesn't necessarily apply to all situations. And as I've said in my videos, a game can have one or even several of the sins and still do fine, although I'm not sure how well Berserk is doing in Russia right now. Apparently it's been replaced with a game called Berserk Heroes, which plays a lot more like the World of Warcraft card game where you have an avatar card and all of that. But this game, it's more an example of how to really botch your rule book. So we have our box contents here. We have a supposed quick start guide that frankly did nothing but confuse me as I read it. We of course have the rule book, which I'll get into in a bit, and we have hey look, boards. That is something I do have to point out about Summoner Wars and Mage Wars. They don't really sell themselves as card games. They sell themselves as board games with the big intricate boxes and the play areas and all of that. So this is a game that comes with a pair of playmats. We have a dwarven board playmat and an elven board playmat. These are, this is what forms our play area here. And then, of course, in here, all nice and bagged up in family tradition, we have the cards. It is another case of a game that I thought we were at the point, even by like 2013, where if you made a game that involved a lot of cards, that the box you ship in would actually be a good holster for the cards. But no, this thing, the box is not even tall enough to hold the cards in it on edge, or it might be. Well, no, not thanks to this. Thanks to this kind of, it can kind of hold the cards on edge, but then you have room for nothing else. You can't stash the playmats or anything in here like that. I thought it was standard operating procedure after a while that you would actually, and yeah, I have one of the decks sleeved up, which I'm going to use as my example. I thought it was like standard operating procedure. Like I've seen a Summoner Wars, I think it's called Summoner Wars Alliances, that has a box that's, you know, all set up to be able to hold all of the cards inside. And I thought that was standard procedure, but apparently it's not. Apparently Fantasy Flight still does just the kind of loose cardboard thing. They don't make the the nice setup where you can actually like properly store your cards in one place, and you can store your mat in another spot, and the tokens and stuff in another spot. That's really, if you want to call yourself an LCG, you need to make it so that I can stash everything in one box. I know Sentinels does that, Legendary does that, a lot of games do that. So here's what we get in the box. Let's set up one of these playmats here. Let's do elves, although I have a swamp deck here, so that's what I've sleeved up here. So the goal of the game is you build a deck of 30 cards, and we're going to use mermaids as our example here. Funny story, speaking of these little bags, these are not these are, you can see like the name on there, these are not they actually included some baggies in the box, baggies that are too small to hold the cards, so I think they were for the tokens, but they included as many baggies as there were cards. Oh well, I use them for tokens anyway. You got negative status, you got damage counters, or actually that's positive status, damage counters, negative status, and of course, dice. They have some nice like little custom molded dice similar to the ones you'd get for Crossmaster. I've talked a bit about Crossmaster on this. It's a miniatures game, but there are actually 6 different regions, and then they included a couple stashes of extra cards for some universal cards and some multi-type cards. There were actually a number of backer rewards. I'm pretty sure this isn't the one. No, these are the red universal cards. I'm pretty sure that this is not one of the ones that was issued as a Kickstarter reward. I got it as it was sealed. Actually, this is a sealed copy of the game, and it did not have. I looked online, and apparently there were a ton of rewards for things that what do they call? How have I forgotten what they call it when you push goals? I think it was that. Push goals, but yeah, these were some of the Kickstarter rewards. You could actually have your likeness put down on a card. All of them are multi-type. These were some backer incentives. These came in the regular set. However, a lot of the things, like they were talking about some other cards like location cards and stuff in the Kickstarter page, but those did not show up here. So what happens is you have your deck, you shuffle it all nice and good. Thankfully, I don't think I've needed to shuffle it too much. And what you do is actually draw half your deck. You build a deck of 30 cards, and what you do is you draw 15 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, I have a very fast way of drawing cards. And then what you do is you take these cards, and you have your characters. And what happens is you have gold characters and silver characters. Like, here's a gold character, here's a silver character. It can be a little hard to tell at this range, but you can kind of tell this one has a bit more of a goldy color to it. And what you do is you have points that you then build your army. You draw half your deck, and from the cards you draw, you have to build your army based on this point buy system. You actually get a couple more points if you go second, and you actually get a few more zones to set up. The first player can only set up in these center 9 zones. The second player also gets these 2 zones to set up with. So, for example, did I get any of my high point characters in this test draw here? Oh, I got Emerald Dragon. So I have, let's say I'm going first. I have 24 gold to spend. Gold units can only be paid for with gold points. Silver units can be paid for with anything. So I still have 15 points. So I can only choose a couple more of these. So for the purposes of the game, I'm going to go with the Melda. That gets me up to 16 out of 24. And Melina. So that gets me, that is 13 plus 9. That is 22. Fortunately, however, that gives me more points to spend in silver. Even if I don't spend all of my points here, I can spend more on silver here. So that means I get 24 points to spend in silver. As the player goes first, you get 24 gold and 22 silver. But like I said, you can pay for silver with everything. So definitely gonna have Stiggy, because he can summon more of himself. Let me see. So I have 22. So I can pull some 6s or 7s. Zeltida, Limnud, or I can actually drop Zeltida and instead put in Naiad and 2 copies of Gelt. So yeah, that would be technically my army. I would then arrange them face down however I want. So I got 8 out of there. 8 seems to be the average number I get out of these, especially if I use big characters like Emerald Dragon. So, oh, this mat's not the best sized, is it? It's awful precise. Yeah. That's a problem I find with a lot of these sorts of games, is that when you're using cards as pawns, you need a lot of space in order to build a mat, and this is just a 3x5 per player, and even then the mat has trouble holding these cards when sleeved. They are taking up a lot of space. But yeah, and then, you know, each character has a move stat. They can move 1, some can move 2, they can move, I believe they can move into opposing territory if there's nothing to stop them. It's like a bulkier version of how Chaotic's movement system works. But what happens is you also launch attacks, and what you have are these special dice. And let's say I roll if you attack a character, first they get to roll a defense dice. For example, if it rolls an X like I just got there, the defense dice would be blocked. If, however, they are exhausted, which means like they attacked or use an ability, then they actually don't get to roll this dice. So there is a risk reward to attacking, and going first doesn't necessarily mean you get a tremendously big advantage. You have fewer points, you have fewer places to set up, and of course you have to go against an opponent that's fresh and thus has the 1 in 3 chance to cause your attack to miss. It's blank on most of these sides, but there's one side with an X that makes the attack miss, and one side that actually has a fist, which means that instead of getting attacked, they instead hit back for a light attack. So there's fist, which is light attack, sword, which is medium attack, and axe, which is heavy attack, which is represented by these numbers here. It gets pretty complicated when a game actually gets rolling. There's also the fact that the rest of your deck kind of goes aside. You don't really draw cards during the game. You don't have a hand of stuff to do. You actually just set up your army and then you just go for it. There's some complexity here. Like, for example, the mermaid deck here is centered on poison. You have the dragons, which are all about being defensive. You have the demons, which are about coming back from the dead. Elves are all about placement and reroll abilities. Dwarves are all about, you know, being robust and staying in position. And orcs, which are the aggro rush deck. And I like my aggro rush decks. If I played this game, it would probably be orc. But like I was saying, the big problem with this game, or at least this set specifically, is the rulebook. The rulebook is a perfect example of how not to write a rulebook. I did a whole talk on my follow-up video about how a rulebook should be put together, and this is an example of how not to do that. First of all, I do talk about how you want to use the back of the book. It's a perfect place to put things like turn order or common status effects or questions. Here, the back is completely blank. For a game like this would be like the perfect place to put like a point buy. They could have put like a point buy chart on here in case something happens to these cards. They could have put common status ailments, common keywords and how they work, turn structure, things like that. But instead, it's completely blank. They don't even put like credits on here, artist credits, designer credits, and it has this hilarious side effect of when you open it up and hold it on the spine, it looks like they're filming like this epic battle scene, but the cameraman is aimed at the wrong thing. Buddy, you need to scooch it over to the right. The evil army's this way. Oh, you moron, you're screwing up the shot. Oh. But yeah, this rulebook has problems. So it starts off, you know, it has a page of lore. That's fine. Let's set my minimum bar here. A page of lore is fine. Let's figure out, how do we win? Where do we have the points on where to win? Your first game, we have card types, placing your army in the battlefield, beginning the battle, other game zones, engaging in combat, and finally, winning the game. There it is, on page 12 out of 18. 2/3 of the way through the manual I had to go to find the game's win condition. Now, I'm sure some of you will be like, but actually put the win condition kind of in the starting paragraph over here. And I'm like, here's the thing. You can't, like, hide your win condition like this. Why put your win condition in, like, an obscure place in the middle of a big block of text. Are you ashamed of your game's win condition or something? It's bizarre. The only other rulebook I've seen do this is Yu-Gi-Oh! But unlike Yu-Gi-Oh!, Berserk doesn't have like this big anime supporting him. I mean, there is an anime called Berserk, but it actually has nothing to do with this game. Like I showed you that little cartoon earlier. It's a game that's centered, more on like barbarians and stuff like that. But moving on here, this rulebook has so many problems. For example, here is how they present the card diagram. And the first time I paged through this book, I didn't even realize that this was supposed to be a card diagram. I thought this was like a list of contents in the box, but instead the card diagram, it's, it's tucked off to the side here, to the side. It's not great layout. A card diagram should try to be a bit larger, a bit more impressive, especially when you have a decently sized book to look through. It should be distinct, it should be eye-catching, and it needs to be informative. Like I've said, you need to present your rules in the order that your players need them. Make the assumption that they are straight up playing the game with pre-constructed decks. I have looked at Yu-Gi-Oh's more recent rulebooks, and it is astonishingly backwards. It is like no other game I've seen except for Berserk here. But they talk about, creature types. They also talk about areas, artifacts, and equipment. And guess what is not in this entire box? Not in any of these decks, or this deck, or these cards, or these cards. Areas, artifacts, and equipment. None of those are in this box anyway. There are no examples of these cards to go on. Apparently there were some as backer reward stretch goals. There's the term, stretch goals. That's what I was talking about. Apparently there were some of these in the backer reward stretch goals, but I've actually heard it said from Dice Tower, don't put the good parts of your game in your Kickstarter only stretch goals. But yeah, since this is, I assume, the retail version of the game, I didn't get any of these cards. And they have all these rules here about cards that never appear in the game, and especially not the first time through. Like I said, you need to assume that players are going to play their first game using pre-constructed decks to see what the game is about. So you don't really need rules on cards that don't appear. There's also rules for cards on flying. Oh, those are their own kettle of fish. There are like 2 in this whole set. One for the dragon deck, and another one is mixed in with the additional. It was one of the backer reward cards. Was that there? But here's the thing: they talk about that flying characters as well as areas actually say here that they go in the additional zone. So where is the additional zone? I checked the rulebook and the answer I got was a shrug. So what's the additional zone? Is off the side of the table the additional zone? Are these weird lines over here? Is this circle the additional zone? Is the additional zone the friends we made along the way? I don't know, but the rulebook doesn't tell me. It also doesn't talk about how movement for flying characters work. It doesn't talk about how poison and scale interact. It doesn't mention whether or not you have to exhaust in order to use the teleport ability. Exhaust is, turning a card sideways to indicate that it's performed its action for the turn. I'm sure people will answer me in the comments, but here's the thing. I'm having these questions after reading the rulebook. I shouldn't have to have... The rulebook is the thing that should answer those questions, and it just does not do a good job. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, the game is from Russia, right? Could it have been just, a translation issue? No! I've actually gone and looked up the Russian version of the game, and reviews there also complain about how terrible this rulebook is. And here's the thing about a terrible rulebook. I don't know if I've said it already, but if you frustrate your players before they've even started playing your game, they are going to have a terrible time. So, yeah, this was a Kickstarter project to try to give Berserk a foothold in the United States on the tail end of Summoner Wars' success. It got one expansion that was released simultaneously with this box set, and it didn't really go anywhere after that. I'm sure it's a fine game. I'm sure it's a fun game. It did last at least a decade in Russia, and that amounts to something at the very least. So I'm sure there's lots of folks out there who are having tons of fun with this game still today. Like I said, it's not necessarily... My 7 Deadly Sins aren't really like, oh, if your game does this, then it's bad and you die. It's more to provoke conversation and to really understand what these sorts of mechanics mean. In this case, it really is just cards as miniatures, and as I've said, that can be problematic. At least they had the decency to put them on a board, and like I said, this is a board game, and they even include boards to play the game on. So yeah, they understood it. They just although we really need to get out of this habit of making games with so many cards that can't like be properly stored in the card. Like the cards in here were like these just loose little cubes just kind of flying around. There's already sorts of little dings on the cards. They're just kind of like slopped in, like they just wanted to kind of forget about it. And that's not how you should treat your card games. You should really strive to give people something that they can really, store their cards in, put on their shelf, display it proudly. And this is yet another example of a game that doesn't quite do that. So, yeah, that is Berserk by Asmodee and Hobby World Entertainment. Hobby World, I believe, is the Russian company. And until next time, this is Kohdok signing off. Happy Halloween!